Hi, everybody. Welcome to the first annual interview with Steve Shultis at the AES. I'm hoping, at least.
You got me booked.
All right,
All right,
excellent.
sure.
Everybody, this is Steve Shultis. He's the Chief Technical Officer at WNYC, NPR Public Radio, just south of us here.
Soho.
Yeah, absolutely. Just a wonderful radio station. I listen all the time. Big fan.
Great.
Not of the radio station, but of you.
Okay. Well, I don't know where to go with that.
Yeah, well, I just like to listen to you.
All right, great.
And thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for
here
asking
at the
me.
booth at WSDG.
Yeah.
You are the Chief Technology Officer. You oversee WNYC. You're responsible for the Green Space, which is WNYC's wonderful event space, performance venue.
We're doing a tech tour, part of AES this year, actually,
Right.
Thursday night.
Thursday night.
Yeah.
Try to make it if you can.
Yeah.
It's fantastic. You've got a conflict. You can't go.
Yeah.
Sorry.
It's based around analog technology.
Okay.
Yeah.
Meaning?
Analog console is the core of the plan. API Vision Console.
Okay. Is that going to be the bulk of the tour? Do you get to see all of that?
That's going to be part of it, but more of the tour is basically constructing an acoustic space that's like 4 meters above a major New York City subway, and at the Holland Tunnel entrance for traffic, and dealing with STC values and trying to get a decent audio quality
Right.
in a place
And
with lots of glass.
Super transparent to the street, right? You can walk by and see what's going on.
15-foot by 20-foot glass. Right.
Excellent.
Yep.
And you've had everybody in there from politicians to musicians to storytellers,
Yep.
podcasters.
Lou Reed opened the space for us.
Oh, fantastic.
And it was a live broadcast, and he dropped 2 F-bombs on it. We caught each one of them, but he kept us on his toes because we know his music pretty well, and the original tunes didn't have F-bombs in it. So he was testing us.
Well, instant credit. Absolutely.
Right,
Instant
right.
street cred.
Yeah.
So you're a member of the NAB Radio Technology, National Radio Systems Committees, foundations at Bearsville Records, California Audio Lab. So you've got bona fides for days, as far as I'm concerned.
I guess.
Yeah.
I mean, Bearsville Records was a high school apprenticeship. That was an incredible opportunity. Really.
How did that happen?
You know, I don't know who to credit at Bearsville. It was either Albert Grossman, the producer, or the owner, or maybe his studio manager at the time. But I was a music rat, in the local high school. I was 16 years old at the time, and I always just hung out in the music department. And one day, my music teacher came to me and said, "Hey, we've got this, somebody from a local recording studio asked if there's a musician with like some audio visual and electronics interest that wants to come work as an apprentice for the recording studio." So I said, "Sign me up."
But that was kind of far from where you were, right?
No, not really.
Geographically, or?
No, it's up in the Catskills. Bearsville is right on the Bearsville Flats out of Woodstock, and ironically, John Sturek designed this, right, in '69, I want to say. It must have been right around the time of Electric Lady. So either he cloned himself or he was just very, very busy for those late '60s years.
Yeah.
But I wound up there in about 1976 to '78. It was, just like Ann talked before, it was an incredible opportunity. It fell in my lap. And I was sort of the gopher's gopher. I staffed the tape library. I made sure that the splicing tape and grease pencils were full. And then I was allowed to basically be the assistants for recordings and things like that. And, it just basically got to cut my teeth on some, professional audio for 2 years. Incredible opportunity.
So you got that opportunity because you're in that club in the high school. What instrument did you play?
I was a saxophone player.
Okay.
Right. Yeah.
And is that what kind of led you to audio, and then audio, of course, led to Bearsville?
Yeah, very similar to Ann's talk. I mean, I was a musician, or I wanted to be a musician, but I also, I loved recording
Same.
people. Right, okay. And, I just recorded anybody. I stuck a microphone in their face and, and experimented with tape and things like that.
Tape machine or like 4-track or?
Just a Wallensack cassette tag, basically, until I got to Bearsville. Then we could play with things. Basically, I kind of used it to, my music interest, bounced off my electronics interest and vice versa. and just basically, I just kind of, I was, you have to be a sponge and just kind of take in everything that you can. And but then going through high school, I realized that I wanted to explore the music side more. So I actually quit Bearsville to go to college. And at the time, there were only two 4-year schools that were offering a sound recording technology program: Miami or State University of New York at Fredonia. They had a Tonmeister program, the sound recording program.
Fascinating.
And so I couldn't afford to go out of state, so I went to SUNY Fredonia. And just met a great, it's all about the classmates were great. I mean, they went on, 10,000 Maniacs came up at the time. They were living out there too. They grew up in Jamestown, and my classmate Gina Tampio's senior project was 10,000 Maniacs demo tape. So we had a great time together for like 4 years and came out with a degree. And explored a little more music at the time. Put myself through college playing polkas every night for 4 years. So I brought the saxophone with me. And then, but by the time I got out of the academic world, I realized I wanted to get more in the classical music recording side of things, and without a leg in really at the studio level at that point. I realized that, I was listening to National Public Radio a lot. In every city I went to, I could hear it, and I heard a lot of classical music. So I said, somebody's got to be recording this and broadcasting it. So I did a little research, and I knew I wanted to move back to New York. So I contacted the local NPR affiliate in New York, WNYC. And, I just went for an interview, and kind of, as they say, the rest is history. So I've been in my first job for now 37 years.
Did you get immediately hired as the chief technical officer?
I did not. No. I had to go through a little proving ground. Yeah. But it was a great job. 7 years of basically, it was like a recording studio with an antenna attached to it. I never saw the studios really. We were basically building control rooms and going to like Carnegie Hall, Avery Fisher Hall, Alice Tully Hall, barge music even on the East River.
Using fly packs and stuff like that?
Well, bringing like Studer consoles with us, like 120-pound Studer consoles that we would tie together to get a decent track count, depending on what you were recording. And we just basically kind of we lived out of a truck for 7 years, and we just basically went from venue to venue, recorded it or broadcast it live via released telephone circuits back to master control, and broadcast it there.
How live was it then? Like, was there any delay? Was it pretty much? Exactly
no.
live?
Well, you know what? It was it was pretty much instantaneous. It was all live. It was copper circuits, right? You'd lease these from the telecom companies. We even put Dolby SR on the circuits to basically cut the noise level down. And there were 15 kilohertz equalized lines that you lease for a lot of money. So you put them in all your venues.
They were owned by.
At that point, we were owned by the city of New York, for better or for worse. That's where we got our call letters from, WNYC. By the way, we're 100 years old this year.
I know, it's fantastic.
Yeah, we went on the air in 1924. But anyway, so that was kind of the wild days with being owned by the city. Pluses and minuses, right? Because now you're basically, your leadership changed every 4 years. Very political. Right, and our jobs were pretty much protected because we were on the front lines. But your leadership changed every 4 years.
Slight direction shift.
Boy, I'll say, right. So, but on the other hand, if you needed 15 kilohertz lines, put 4 pair in at Avery Fisher. We need backup, and
the city would do that.
They would pay for it, yeah. So we broke the city. I know, $4,000 a month circuits or something.
Worth it.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Anyway, where do you want to go from there?
Well, I had a question about the role that radio plays in the proliferation of news, right?
Oh.
In terms of like, now that we're on the other side of the pandemic, being that radio is so important for emergency broadcast and up-to-date news, and it's sort of one of the most accessible medias, I think. The question is really, what lessons have you taken forward, not from pre-pandemic to pandemic, but from pandemic to post-pandemic, what has stayed, right, in terms of the role of the mothership, or how people are using the office or not using the office,
Sure.
technology things. Like, it's just a pretty open-ended
Wow.
question.
Okay, yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. Well, starting with the newsroom, that's near and dear to my heart because we have a 56-person newsroom. It's a huge newsroom. It's very vibrant, and we cover both print, if you will, web. We own the Gothamist, and it's also live on air. It's a very interesting mix of journalists and audio journalists, if you will.
Meaning, like, podcasty stuff?
Well,
or?
no, really kind of print.
Okay.
Every day we basically publish both news podcasts 3 times a day, and also a web page of very hyper-local news in New York City, the Gothamist Daily, basically. But it's a very interesting mix, it's a very unique newsroom because you have people with voices and talent for reading and for creating stories, and sound designers to make it to give the environment of it. And we publish these podcasts, 3 times a week, 3 times a day on a podcast series called NYC Now, which basically prepackages some of the terrestrial live broadcast feeds with sound designed podcast, deeper elements, deeper stories,
Deeper dives.
Yeah, deeper dives recorded that you won't necessarily get on the air. So and then you have also the choice of just going to the website, the Gothamist website, and then reading in even more detail about a certain story. So it's funny, I just had just a quick story. One of our engineers retired just last week after 43 years. I brought in a caterer, and I started talking. They're just a local person. They started in the pandemic. And, they didn't know us. I didn't know them, but, I tried them. And I said, well, how did you get started? And they said, oh, we got a great review in the Gothamist. I said, well, that's us, And they didn't realize, they knew we were a radio station, but they didn't realize the tie there. And I think
Multiliminal.
I think the branding is very difficult today, especially when you've got the webpage, will get 4 million views. It's a very heavily trafficked web page, and we monetize it. So you got to stay in business. So there's that group too, and then there's the terrestrial group, which is a much different demographic, right? And trying to marry the two, and then also bring in the podcast part of it. That's a very interesting potpourri of audio and data.
And when you say terrestrial, you mean people that are actually turning on the radio,
right? Broadcasting, right? Yeah. And frankly, we know that. Well, it's either terrestrial is the broadcast side. We have eight broadcast facility, 8 transmissions systems in the tri-state area, but also the live streams. Even though we have just a handful of, we have a non-profit classical station and a non-commercial talk station, but we have 10 digital streams. We have a 24/7 opera channel. We have 24/7 big band music channel. We have a few of these different styled streams. And so there's a mixture of those live streams too, with the spoken word and with the terrestrial feed. Some of them are simulcast, but most of them are not.
So this is your facility, right?
Yeah, that's the ground floor facility.
2009?
2008. Yeah, right.
So that's the green space we were just talking about.
Yeah, this area right here. Yeah, actually, this whole side, actually. Yeah.
Right, back of house and everything.
Right, back of house and front of
this
house.
Is Varick and Charlton, and you can see all the way out to the street. It's fantastic. The visibility is great.
Yep.
Going upstairs, these are your studios.
Right. That's our broadcast studios. 5 broadcast studios on this floor.
And the newsroom is?
The newsroom is this entire L shape here. So, so 56 people basically sit in there. And then these are basically sound design booths, if you will, edit booths, but basically. So we embed, I've got a handful of engineers and sound designers on my team, And they serve multiple purposes, but we actually embed 2 of them full time and some per diem right into the newsroom. So their sole job is basically to sound design, support in sound design news feeds. The typical NPR style, is a news feature could be 7 minutes long and it's deeply mixed. We're a huge Pro Tools shop. We've got 130 seats of Pro Tools. So these sound designers are spread throughout the building and at home.
So if you know how to use Pro Tools, you might have a better chance of getting a post here.
Big time, yes,
right.
yeah.
Right. So you just mentioned something about working at home.
Yeah.
So talk to us, please, about the changes we've gone through in the last 5 years and what's sticking, right?
Sure.
I mean, the hybrid approach, there's pluses and minuses, but I think we've sort of evolved into, I think, a situation that has taken pluses from both and sort of rejected a lot of minuses, right?
Yeah, I didn't follow the math there, but I know I know what you mean.
I told you there would be calculus.
Yeah, you did. But yeah, so much has taken place. First of all, just to get through the pandemic and stay in business, the podcast world, and as a broadcaster, it's based on interviews, like we're doing today. And when that can't happen face to face, you have to make it happen virtually, right? So, there's Zoom and there's Microsoft Teams and stuff like that. But we wanted to keep the quality better. So we were...
And there's an inherent latency to those, right? Like, I was talking over you, I canceled you out. And all
Absolutely,
that.
yeah.
I forgot to unmute.
Right, sure. No, it's a big mess. So we were an very early adopter in something called Riverside FM, which is basically a full fidelity wave file, recordings, but with a low delay tie between 2 people speaking remotely.
Is that something that somebody as high powered as WNYC can only use, or can everyone?
No, it's a cost. But like we got in very early, and we basically worked with them to kind of develop it. But here's an example of just the right technology at the right time, right? Because without that, we would have had terrible sounding Zoom conversations on a podcast.
Glitchy.
Sure,
latent,
a lot of artifacts and things
crosstalk.
like this. But this technology allowed us to basically, put the technology in a very simple device. We basically built 30 kits. We took 30 Pelican kits. We bought 30 Microsoft Surfaces. We dumbed them down in a kiosk mode so that anybody could operate it. You had 3 connections. You plugged it in. You plugged in your microphone to it, and you plugged in your Wi-Fi to it.
I think my mom could use that.
Absolutely. But we shipped them around the world, and we had 6 dedicated only to like this opera series, and we just sent it to opera singers, like 3 a week, and we just kept the series going that way. You basically you open the kit, you flip it on the side, so it's a typical Pelican case. You've got all the foam in place, so that served as a little bit of an acoustic barrier in somebody's living room or kitchen, wherever they were talking, and they powered up the Surface, and away they go, and they connect with the technical director or the talent wherever they are. And you get a high latency, high quality feed in the cloud, but while you're talking back and forth, you get a low latency, low quality connection, so you could have a normal conversation.
So you can keep up the
just the normal
timing.
Dialogue, right? Exactly. Yes, comedy dialogue timing, right?
Excellent. And so those are still in circulation.
They are. But now the home studio part is a whole nother thing, and I think we even have some photos of that here somewhere. So we went from, this is our formal, on-air studio. A lot of technology here. There's intercom. There's touch screens, call screener systems, and things like that. And so we went from that in March of 2020 to April of 2020. There's our he's on the air every day. Monday through Friday, 2 hours, live talk, live call-ins. Guests coming in through virtually, and he's operating out of his living room or kitchen, wherever he is. That's
in a really ergonomic chair.
Right, exactly. Yeah, it's more ergonomic than my home chair.
Uh-oh.
but yeah.
And all of this gear came from
us,
from you.
right? And stuff that you don't see there. I mean, there's like a 1.5 kVA UPS that we sent. You know, because remember, you're putting your talent, you're putting your resources out into the unknown. You know, you spend millions of dollars building a facility. You know, we've got a 500 kilowatt generator on the roof. We've got a 250K a UPS to hold us over. We've got clean power everywhere. And you just kind of throw that away and say, all right, go broadcast from home.
You're in the wild now.
Right.
Be free.
Right, exactly, right? Yeah, free with consequences. So we bought like 30 UPSs. We sent them to everybody who was home, just so that there's a little bit of a safety factor, both for, you know, conditioning the power for the equipment, and also if somebody has a power outage, at least you've got about an hour of time where the producers can scramble and find somebody else, because they're only going to be held over for like an hour or so. And so, frankly, you know, this has become a thing. Brian has not come back to the office, so we have a hybrid work policy, 2 days a week minimum in the studio, in the office. There are exceptions to that, though, you know, and it's based on personal and business things and geography, you know.
Lots of variables.
Right, lots of variables, including geography is very interesting, because now you don't necessarily have to hire somebody who's in commuting distance. If you've got a great talent that you want to use and, you know, they live in Seattle, Washington, bring them on.
Or if they want to relocate.
Right, exactly,
Perhaps,
sure.
But you still want to maintain that relationship.
Right.
You have the ability to do that and the capacity to do that.
Sure. And so, like the home studios, if you toggle ahead a little bit, I think even the podcast studios, maybe they didn't get in there. The home studios.
Oh.
Okay, it's okay. But no, because we have, you know, Radiolab. You know, they've got, you know, millions of downloads. You know, we transfer a petabyte of audio data per month for streams and podcasts, and 85% of that is podcast data. And you know, upwards of 40 million downloads a month of these podcasts. And these sound designers have basically moved out of the studio. They've built beautiful home studios. And they're basically, you know, working out of there. They come on site for collaboration meetings and you know generating ideas and kicking around ideas. But honestly, now, you know, when the rubber meets the road to actually sound design something, they're going back to their home studios. So, you know, it's an interesting real estate quandary now too, because here, you know, and we're not alone. You know, we're sitting on close to 100,000 square feet, and how much of it is really used on a day-by-day basis? So we're doing that study, you know, as we speak, to see what is our new footprint going to look like. You know, we don't know exactly what it's going to be yet, but I can sure tell you it's not going to be 100,000 square feet.
Right,
know?
and I bet the process by which you figure out what is valuable, what is a collaboration space, what is something that could happen at home, what's the factor, the percentage factor you use, is going to be very telling.
Yeah, right. And I think we're also trying to figure out how important is face-to-face communication. You know, what do you lose by it? What do you gain by it? I think, you know, 4 years later, we're still all trying to figure that out. And but I can tell you, it is a good feeling to come in and see people. You put clothes on, you put pants on. You know, you come in. You know,
not all sweatpants.
Shoes, right, shoes, and you talk to people. You know, and you know, so it's the typical thing. I'm sure you've all heard it before. It's like, you know, if you're going to have just a quick flyby conversation with a colleague, you know, you might come up with a great discussion point, where that could take, you know, a day and a half to schedule a 15-minute Zoom call. And we're all coming up with like 10 meetings per day of Zoom calls. And it's
and
just,
you get Zoom fatigue, which is real.
Yeah, right, yeah. So, you know, I cherish the in-person part, but you have to ask yourself, from a real estate point of view and from just an economics point of view, where's the sweet spot? What does it make sense to do on site, and what makes sense to stay off site?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So one more question for you. What is the worst advice you've ever been given?
All right. All right, I have a personal answer and a professional answer. Should I
Right.
give both of them?
Yes, but one after the other.
Okay, they're not the same. So, the worst personal advice I got was from an uncle when I just got my first job and I had a paycheck coming in. He said, "You need a new car. Invest in a new car." And terrible advice. And I bought an Oldsmobile. It was before the Oldsmobile ad. That's not your father's Oldsmobile. It was my father's Oldsmobile. It was terrible car. Right
Or
out
in this
of
case, maybe your uncle's Oldsmobile.
maybe so. Right out of Fargo. The Oldsmobile color. So anyway, bad advice there. Sank a lot of money into that and never. And then the professional advice, and this kind of comes close to home to you guys, is that when we've built out before, we were told by project managers outside of our organization to invest in an acoustician from the corporate world, as opposed to like the studio world. And we wound up with a very poor product that we had to work very hard to make sound good, either with ripping things out and doing double work basically to replace it, or to try to make the best we could with the change in technology. So
Right. Stay with what you know, right? And
Yeah.
learn all the things.
Sure.
and,
Right.
work it out.
Yeah.
Well, Steve, thank you so much
Absolutely.
for doing this and
Sure.
coming here. We really appreciate it. I learned a lot, and
Appreciate you having me.
Can't wait for next year.
Absolutely. Book me up. Okay.
I'll see you upstate.
Yeah, you bet. In the valley.
That's right, the Valley.